Welcome to the podcast. Today, we're diving into the fascinating history of federal diversity programs in the United States and the progress and controversies surrounding LGBTQ+ rights. Let's get started.
Absolutely. This is such an important topic. Can you give us an overview of how diversity policies have shaped America?
Well, it all started back in the 1940s with racial desegregation and affirmative
Right.
action. The US government began playing a major role in promoting workplace diversity, civil rights, and protections for marginalized groups.
That's interesting. So the efforts expanded over time, right?
Exactly. They initially focused on race, but later expanded to include gender equality, disability rights, and eventually LGBTQ+ protections.
Mm-hmm.
But, these programs weren't without controversy. They've sparked legal battles, political divisions, and cultural debates.
Yeah, I can imagine, especially regarding LGBTQ plus rights, which remain quite a flashpoint even today.
Absolutely. Debates over religious freedom, education, military service, and workplace inclusion have really shaped modern policies.
Yeah.
But let's rewind a bit and look at the early federal diversity efforts.
Sure, let's do that. What were some of the significant early actions?
Well, during World War II, President Franklin D. Roosevelt issued Executive Order 8802 in 1941, which prohibited racial discrimination in defense
Oh,
industry
right.
jobs. It was one of the first major federal efforts toward workplace diversity and racial inclusion.
That's great. But did these early efforts include LGBTQ plus individuals?
Unfortunately, no. LGBTQ+ individuals remained excluded and even faced active discrimination. In fact, discrimination persisted in federal agencies and private industries.
That's disappointing. So when did affirmative action come into play?
Affirmative action began with the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which was a landmark law prohibiting discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin.
Got it.
Title VII of the Act banned workplace discrimination and created the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission to enforce these protections.
And did that include affirmative action programs?
Yes, exactly. In 1965, President Lyndon B. Johnson issued Executive Order 111246, requiring federal contractors to take proactive steps to ensure workplace diversity.
Interesting.
This helped increase access to education and employment for racial minorities and women.
But I bet there were controversies, right?
Oh, absolutely. Critics argued that affirmative action led to reverse discrimination, favoring minorities over
Right.
white applicants. And again, LGBTQ+ individuals were not included in these protections.
So when did the government start addressing LGBTQ plus rights?
Well, that's where things get a bit complicated. From the 1950s to the 1970s, there was actually systemic discrimination against LGBTQ+ workers, known as the Lavender Scare.
Oh, I've heard about that. Can you elaborate?
Sure. During that period, thousands of government employees were fired or forced to resign due to suspicions of being gay.
That's awful.
Executive Order 12450, issued by President Eisenhower in 1953, explicitly barred LGBTQ+ individuals from federal employment.
So they were considered security risks during the Cold War era?
Exactly, but it was ultimately baseless. It exposed deep-seated discrimination in government agencies and sparked early LGBTQ+ activism and legal battles.
Mm-hmm.
LGBTQ+ workers had no legal recourse against discrimination at that time.
When did things start to change for the better?
The first steps toward LGBTQ+ inclusion in federal policy came in the 1990s.
Okay.
In 1993, the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy allowed LGBTQ+ individuals to serve in the military, but required them to remain closeted.
That seems like a half measure.
Exactly. It was widely criticized for forcing service members to hide their identity. Then, in 1998, President Clinton issued Executive Order 13287, prohibiting discrimination against LGBTQ+ workers in federal agencies.
So that was a significant step forward?
Yes, but LGBTQ+ people remained unprotected in private sector employment.
I see.
It wasn't until much later that more comprehensive protections were put in place.
What about in the 2000s and beyond? How did LGBTQ plus rights and diversity programs expand?
In 2014, President Obama issued Executive Order 13672, extending non-discrimination protections to LGBTQ plus employees of federal contractors.
That's
And in
great.
2020, the Supreme Court ruling in Bostock versus Clayton County determined that Title VII of the Civil Rights Act protects LGBTQ plus employees from workplace discrimination.
So LGBTQ plus rights became officially recognized in federal policy?
Exactly. This led to more inclusive hiring practices and corporate diversity initiatives.
Fantastic.
However, there were still controversies. Religious groups challenged these protections, arguing they violate religious freedom.
That's a tricky balance to find.
Indeed, some states even refuse to enforce federal diversity policies. The debates over religious freedom versus equal rights continue to shape policies today.
And what about military service and transgender rights?
Well, the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell in 2011 allowed openly gay and lesbian service members.
That's a win.
But in 2017, the Trump administration introduced a ban blocking transgender individuals from serving in the military.
That must have been a significant setback.
It was. However, in 2021, President Biden issued an executive order reversing the ban, restoring transgender military service rights.
Glad to hear
It
that.
created a more inclusive military force, but critics argued that changing policies created instability.
I can see how that could be a concern.
Exactly. And some religious and conservative groups oppose transgender service members. So,
Yeah.
the controversy persists.
Do you think LGBTQ plus protections will expand further?
Well, some lawmakers are pushing for a National Equality Act, which would ban LGBTQ plus discrimination in all workplaces.
That would be monumental.
But others seek religious exemptions, arguing that businesses shouldn't be forced to serve LGBTQ plus individuals.
It's a complex issue, balancing equal rights with religious freedoms.
Exactly. And with some states banning DEI programs in schools and government offices, the future of federal diversity programs is uncertain.
Right.
Policies may shift depending on election outcomes.
Maybe the government should continue funding diversity programs, or perhaps they should be left to private organizations.
That's a fair question.
Yeah.
It's like trying to decide whether a gardener should tend to a growing tree or let nature take its course.
Interesting analogy. But don't you think government involvement is necessary to ensure equal protections?
I do. But there's also the argument that too much government intervention can stifle individual freedoms.
I see.
It's a delicate balance.
That's true. Perhaps a collaborative approach between government and private organizations could be effective.
Absolutely. Collaboration could help address the needs of marginalized groups while respecting various viewpoints.
Exactly.
It's about finding common ground.
Well, it's clear that federal diversity programs have evolved significantly over time.
Definitely. From early efforts in racial desegregation to the gradual inclusion of LGBTQ plus rights, we've come a long way.
We have.
But there's still work to be done.
Agreed. The journey towards equality is ongoing.
Absolutely. And as society continues to evolve, so too will the policies that shape it.
Exactly.
It's important to stay informed and engaged in these discussions.
Thank you for this insightful conversation.
Thank you. It's been great discussing this with you.